Hi everyone, I'm Alex.
And I'm Ben.
And we are Married with Dragons. And we are on episode 12.
Are we?
Yes.
Goodness.
I know, I accidentally did two episode 10s last week.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
oh,
I forgot to count.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, we're on episode 12. Hello to everyone that's in the chat.
Hello.
Sorry,
You're right. I've been annoying Alex off stream already, so I think
Yes.
she's already just about had enough of me.
I'm about to-
We only just started the episode.
I'm just distancing myself because you're annoying.
I am. It's fine. It's fine. Oh, goodness.
Oh, yes, D&D.
So what are we going to be talking about tonight?
So, well, we're starting off with a funny story.
It's a funny story, which I could see coming as a D. I could see the story coming a mile away. We'll get to that.
And then we're going to be talking about pretty much like the standard campaigns versus kind of homebrew and the balance between that.
Yeah, and a little bit of the, intricacies of homebrew, I guess, and sort of what it means.
And how you can probably mix, I guess, standard campaign and homebrew elements as well.
As both a player and a DM, primarily as a DM, but you can still use some homebrew aspects as a player as well. And of course, let's not forget the end of the stream.
Yes, and we got
the joke.
We got a joke.
My favourite part, and I'm sure your favourite part.
Oh yes.
So the story this week.
Yeah, so this happened in
the campaign we're running at the moment.
And I think it was last session too.
It did happen last session, yes. So it's quite fresh in the minds.
Yeah. So we were our group was part of a travelling convoy off to suss out a certain caravan in this convoy, see where they're going, what they're up to, what sus things they're doing. And while on our travels, there was another caravan.
There's a few caravans.
Well, yeah.
A couple.
So, but the one nearest, this caravan had a nobleman, prim and proper, doing a little bit of animal cruelty.
Yes, I suppose children warning. I don't know what you say,
warning?
trigger, but I'm not going to get into the details of it. But he wasn't being very nice to his horse.
Yeah, being rather mean, and so there's me and one other female in the chat. We're very emotional.
I'd like to preface this by saying, as a DM, as a dungeon master, one of my favourite things about D&D is you never know what the players are going to do. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the scenarios that are going to come about. But I tell you what, I could see this coming a mile away. Yeah. When I was doing the information, the writing on this NPC, I was like, this is going to go south real quick. Yeah. Just because I know you guys, and I was like, yeah, I can see this going bad.
Yeah. So some of our party wanted to just talk it out, while the minority of the party, being me and one other person, were like, no. Violence is the only answer.
Honestly, I was surprised with how many people actually wanted to talk it out. I assumed everyone would think violence is the answer.
No, we were ready to take down this NPC and save the mighty horse.
Basically, this NPC over the course of a couple of days had been just really badly mistreating the horse. Calling it names. Overriding it. And it was quite clear that he wasn't a very very kind person to his horse, and I think that the anger level of the party was slowly growing as each day passed.
And we were out for blood after that stage. We were ready to take this NPC down, and so we started something.
Well, it escalated very quickly. It got to the end of the day. This bloke's horse collapsed as the convoy was sort of pulling over. This guy's horse collapsed, and he ended up just laying into it a little bit. Prior to this, some people had tried talking to this guy who, language warning, was a little bit of a dick. He's not a very nice guy. He's not a very nice noble. He's a bit up himself. Not a very nice guy. And he started just laying into this horse. And was it you or... No, it was the other player that decided to... that just had enough.
Yeah, they whacked him.
Yep.
They whacked him.
They just straight up started attacking this guy. Like, in the middle of everyone else. Like, this guy's just a random civilian. He's not actually, like, you know, like, he's a bad dude. But, like, he's not actually a bad guy. They just started attacking this random guy who's part of their travelling company.
And then I joined in because our party got stabbed. And I was like, oh, hell no.
Again, in my defence, you guys got attacked out of retaliation. You can't attack someone and then expect them to be like, oh, yeah, that's okay. Like, no worries.
Well, ideally, you'd want to be like hoping that the no would have been like, "Oh, sorry." And then,
so you whack him in the head, and the first thing he does is, "Oh, sorry."
Yes, that is what I was expecting because he had to be sorry for what he was doing.
Right, but that isn't quite what happened. It escalated very quickly. There's a bit of a crowd of people watching everything happen. Half the party was sort of out for blood trying to kill this bloke who he had some friends step in to help him in the encounter. Half the party was sort of just standing back being like, no, wait, don't do it, don't kill him. Like, you guys killed him pretty quickly.
And I was ramming him.
Like, you were ramming him?
So, just a bit of context, my character has horns, goat horns, so I was using my ram attack, ramming left, right and centre.
This guy was not having a good time. He died very quickly.
Yeah.
And eventually his companions sort of agreed, like, you know, enough's enough. You've just murdered our friend in broad daylight in front of all these witnesses.
True.
Maybe we don't want to keep going down this path.
And then during that, once we accidentally killed the nobleman. I mean, like, we weren't intentionally...
You guys were attacking. What do you think would happen?
Well, we kind of thought he would just go unconscious, not die, but, you know, it is what it is. And, during that, we started to end it, but then the nobleman had a friend who was a mage of some sort, and of course they had to use the cursed fireball.
I wouldn't be DMing properly if the wizard, the mage, didn't cast fireball on the party. I had to cast fireball. I had to.
The worst, most unfortunate but effective spell.
And my favourite part was it hits everyone. Everyone survives. Everyone's okay. Like, it's not like the party was anywhere close to dying. This is a bit of a scuffle. It was more of like a role-play encounter almost. But one of my players, like, you know, obviously had set the scene prior, and one of my players goes, hey, like after everyone had done their saves, everyone had done their health, one of my players goes, hey, what about the horse? I'm sort of sitting there like,
yeah.
Well, the horse was in the fireball radius.
And it was crispy.
It unfortunately did not do well, which was the pinnacle of excellence, I think, for like the hilarity of the moment, because this whole murder combat in front of all these witnesses started because you guys, you know, liked a horse. And then in the midst of doing so, the horse got killed anyway.
Yeah, so it was...
You basically murdered an actually innocent man for no reason whatsoever.
It was a giant waste of time.
And legit, he wasn't like a convict. He was just a random dude. Yeah. You guys committed murder in front of everyone.
It was, yeah. It was very frustrating to know that we went through all of that effort.
All of it over a horse.
Over a horse, hoping, you know, we'll have the happy ending of setting the horse free and it can go home or to a field or find a family, you know, live its horse dreams, and it ended up being barbecue. So we went and caused attention to ourselves and
like I said, before this happened, like, I never know what the party's going to do. It's the best part about it. But before this happened, I was writing this character, I was writing like the whole, like, you know, his animal cruelty aspect, the whole horse collapsing, and I'm like, I could bet money on it. I guarantee the party's going to start shit.
Yeah.
The party's going to get into a fight. It's all going to go downhill. I can see it happening already.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, what happened?
Well, if it has to do with animals, I feel like I always just arc up. Doesn't matter what kind of animal.
Yeah.
It's not a good time.
Yeah, so it was, and that was like within the first couple of days of travelling with this group of people as well. It's like 3 days in, you guys have already set yourself up to be known as, like, you know, those people that murdered that guy. Like, yeah. Anyway.
It was just...
I thought it was funny.
Tragic.
As a DM, it was great to just sit back and let it all unfold. It was excellent.
But in saying that though, I think it's time we talked a bit about homebrew.
Yes. So...
For anyone that doesn't know what homebrew
what actually is homebrew?
Take it away.
I knew you were going to do that.
From a DM's perspective.
From a DM's perspective. So, homebrew, it's I think it's. I might get in trouble for saying this from some of the D&D enthusiasts out there, but I think it's pretty much impossible to play D&D without adding some sort of homebrew into what you do. Homebrew is basically when you create a rule, a ruling, an interpretation of a rule, when you create content, when you create really anything that's not raw or rules as written is classified as homebrew. It's something that's not strictly part of the rule book. And the reason I say that you can't really play D&D without homebrewing a little is because there are so many different interpretations, there's so many different rules. You know, you're always coming up with stuff on the fly all the time. Obviously, you're using the rules as guidelines and whatnot, but you're constantly coming up with stuff on the fly. You're constantly improvising. You're constantly, reading through how something might work and making judgment calls and stuff like that. So, I suppose a really basic way of explaining homebrew is when you do something that's not rules as written or raw.
Yeah.
And that can be in the form of many things. It could be, like I said, the interpretation of a rule. It could be, the big one that we're probably going to touch on tonight is when you're playing D&D, you can play what's known as pre-written campaigns or homebrew campaigns. A pre-written campaign is when you get a module book. You get a book full of lots of NPCs, plot hooks, a main story, and you use the book as the driving force for your campaign. And then a homebrew campaign is something that you come up entirely on your own. You've got to come up with the world, you've got to come up with the NPCs, you've got to come up with the problems, the villains, the catalyst of what's going on. You've got to come up with everything on your own. And there's that sort of middle ground of when you're using a campaign book as your D&D setting, you can still add your own bits and pieces, your own homebrew
components into it.
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
So if you were doing like kind of a pre-written campaign and a bit of homebrew, what percentage do you usually have? Like, is it kind of like 70-30?
I think it's
50?
It's very dependent on the group you're playing with. And I think for me, the homebrew, how much homebrew I put into, if I'm running a pre-written campaign, how much homebrew I put into it is dependent a lot on the characters' backstories and how in-depth the players go into their characters' backstories. Because if the players go really in depth and create this really fleshed out, well-constructed backstory, it gives me a lot to work with and gives me a lot of ideas to homebrew some scenarios and some side quests or subplot lines and stuff to work into the main campaign.
Some player personality into it as well with
100%. Yeah. And it's a really great way as well, especially if you are, running, a pre-written campaign. It's a fantastic way to really link your players in with the world that you're running.
Yeah.
And making them feel like, they actually are a part of this world. They're not just, players that have been dropped in. I won't go into too much detail, but for example, like a really simple little homebrew stuff that I've done with your character for the campaign is in a city that you've previously lived in. When you went there, I had a bit of a long lost lover, a bit upset. Why didn't you come back and see me?
Why didn't you call me back?
Why didn't you call me back? And so this person came and was a bit dishevelled and upset as to where you'd been, what you've been doing. That sort of stuff is classified as homebrew because it's not something that's part of the actual campaign book that I'm running, but it's something to add in there to really cement your characters into the world and make them feel like they're a part of the campaign that you're running. And I mean, as a player, do you obviously enjoy that sort of stuff?
I think so. I think obviously when playing a pre-written campaign and the DM not revealing what's homebrew and what's not, you can't actually tell as a player unless it's something really obscure. Obviously you can tell when you pre-write a bit of backstory into campaigns, you can tell that's homebrew. But say if you throw a random encounter somewhere or throw a random little plot twist, you probably won't be able to tell. But I feel like adding a bit of homebrew to a pre-written campaign just makes it a bit more personalized for your own group, which is quite nice. And you revealed in our most recent campaign that you even homebrewed the introduction.
Yeah, I really didn't like. I was just not a fan of the way that the pre-written campaign started. I didn't love how the campaign started. I thought it was a bit stilted. You were sort of thrown into it, and it almost, to me, the way the campaign started felt a bit more like a video game, where you sort of spawn in there and there's no real reason or rhyme as to what's going on. So rather than doing it that way,
kind of like the start of Skyrim.
Kind of a little bit, yeah. Whereas trying to homebrew it a little bit more, it allowed me to, like, I went to the players and I said, right, when you create your backstory, come up with a reason as to why you might be in this area at this particular time. And I let the players come up with reasonings as to why they were where they were, what they might be doing. And I let them really take the reins on the story. And
it was kind of like you made us feel like we wrote, like, as a group, with our backstories and why we were there and what we were doing. It felt like on that first session we were making up the introduction as we go as the players, not you. Because, you gave us the opportunity to say, I was here doing this, and I could just go on about what I was doing, what I wanted to do, who I was interacting with.
Even like knowing people in the particular town. Like some people wrote into their backstories, like, I know this person or this person, and, it allowed you guys, as you said, sort of have the campaign sort of open how you wanted it to run.
And I think if you went ahead and said that wasn't homebrew, I probably wouldn't have noticed. I probably thought the pre-written campaign just had a really open introduction where you could personalise it. But when you told me the difference between the two, the homebrew sounded a lot better than the actual pre-written stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool that you can, when you do a pre-written campaign, you can change things like that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can change as much as you want at the end of the day. I mean, one of my mates actually has pointed out to me, and I've noticed it since doing a few pre-written campaigns, is most of the pre-written campaigns, the start is generally pretty stilted because there needs to be, obviously the pre-written campaign can't have a million different reasons as to why a million different players might be there. So there's got to be a reason for people to be together and for people to start going off on the adventure. So a lot of the time, the start of a campaign is probably where you might want to do a bit more homebrew, if that's something you think your players would enjoy and you would enjoy. That's probably the spot to add a bit more homebrew, because that's certainly the right spot. The start is where you want to integrate people into the world, and you want to, really focus and hone in on who they are and what they're doing, what their goals are. And then obviously as the story progresses, it becomes bigger and bigger, and there's obviously bigger goals, and it's bigger than just themselves.
Yeah.
But you've touched on a good point though. I think that the mark of being able to do successful homebrew is when players can't tell that it's homebrew. I mean, obviously, if you're doing an entire campaign that you've written yourself, obviously everything is homebrew. But if you're running a pre-written campaign and the players can't actually tell what's pre-written, what's homebrew, I think that's a sign that you're obviously doing it quite well, because it's working smoothly together.
Yeah.
Has there been any times or parts when it's been really obvious or open to you, like, okay, this is clearly just something that he's added in, or?
Apart from backstory interpretation and addition into the campaign, I haven't really noticed too much. There might have been I don't know, maybe some features I think that you kind of what's the word? You kind of make up as you go.
Some of the features.
So, for example, in the last campaign, when we're going through a valley of mountains, where you mentioned there might have been a cave with trolls, we didn't know if that was a potential homebrew if we went to investigate that. Or when we had the encounter with the weird owl birds, not owl birds, owl bears.
Owl birds.
Owl bears. I was kind of thinking maybe that could have just been a homebrew just to spice up the travel a bit more.
Yeah, so I mean, generally encounters are probably the most common. Homebrew might not necessarily be the right word for it, but as far as running a pre-written campaign goes, random encounters are probably the most common homebrewed part, because that's when a lot of that sort of stuff, you get the feel of the session and how everything's going, and you sort of, as you're playing, you might think, there's been a big stretch of roleplay or a big stretch of downtime, I might chuck an encounter in here to spice things up. So that sort of stuff you kind of do, with a bit of feel throughout the session as well. But yeah, that's probably one of the main things you're going to add into pre-written campaigns, is the sort of random encounters, random events and stuff like that. But yeah, you might not realise you're going to be doing that until the actual time. Sort of links in really closely to improv, I guess. Some other homebrew stuff that is quite common that is probably good to discuss with your group at the start of the game is homebrew rules. Quite a contentious topic.
Have you ever done homebrew rules?
Yes.
Okay.
The most substantial homebrew rule that I use, which makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people agree or disagree with this, but technically, rules as written, with death saves, we've spoken about death saves, when you're unconscious, you've got to roll the dice. Technically, if you get a 10 or higher, you succeed. If you get lower than 10, you fail. However, my OCD doesn't like that. To me, death saves should be, it's a 50-50 chance, success or failure. And if it's a 10 or higher, you succeed, that's actually a 55% chance. Because there's 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
Yeah.
So there's actually 11 chances out of 20 to succeed. So a homebrew rule that I incorporate is on your death save, you actually have to get 11 or higher. Because that means it's an exactly 50-50 chance. It's up to fate. There's no modifiers or anything involved. At this point, you're in the hands of fate. You've got a 50-50 chance of success or failure.
Would you ever homebrew it? Homebrew it. I'm just thinking about death saves, and I just had a thought of my two-sided dice.
Yeah.
Or is that too close of a...
I feel like it's too close. I like the 20-sided die for the extra. I think it adds a bit more excitement factor. And the thing with homebrew, particularly with rules that you need to be really careful about, is you don't want to homebrew too much of that sort of stuff. The rules are there because they have been tested, they've been play tested, they've had lots of people talk about them, and that they're meant to work.
Yeah.
Majority of the rules you should probably leave alone. And if you are going to homebrew some rules or change some rules in that aspect, make sure that you have that conversation with your players. Like another homebrew sort of rule that I've done in a previous campaign and I thought about doing in this campaign is having a 30-second timer in combat. So when it's your turn, gets to your character's turn, put the timer on. You have 30 seconds to decide what it is you're going to do. You can have as long as you need to actually roll the dice and physically have the turn.
Yeah.
But you've only got 30 seconds to decide what your turn is going to be, basically.
Yeah.
And the whole point of that homebrew rule was to try and speed up combat, because combat in D&D is generally what can take a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
To also keep people engaged in combat, because if you know you've only got a short amount of time to make a decision, it means that when it's not your turn, you're going to be paying attention because you want to know what's going on. So to try and help with that side of things, if you've got players that zone out when it's not their turn, I found that to actually be a really useful homebrew rule to implement in my previous campaign. I found it really helpful. I mean, you were a player in that campaign. Do you think that was...
I did, especially when you were... Because we did have some players that didn't really focus on what they were going to do until it got to their turn. And by the time you looked at the clock, 5 minutes has passed and the person has no idea what they still want to do. And it got frustrating. It made things really, really long. And yeah, I found the 30-second rule to be just so good.
And 30 seconds doesn't sound like a very long period of time.
Yeah.
But as a player, it actually is a long time.
I think the 30 seconds is that's not the issue. It's the fact that you have this whole extra time before your turn. You have your turn, don't worry about 30 seconds for the moment. You have that whole entire turn until it gets back to you to figure out what you want to do, and then you have that 30 seconds to implement it.
And the point of that timer wasn't meant to... It wasn't actually meant to affect you much on your turn. It was more meant to make you feel the pressure that you're right, I've got to be on the ball. I've got to know what I want to do.
If you were actually in combat, you wouldn't be standing there for 5 minutes figuring out what you're going to do. Yeah. So I found the rule is good, and I think that's
But it's dependent on group though. Because I suppose the point I was making with that particular homebrew rule is I mentioned it to you guys in my new group that I'm running now. I mentioned to them all at the start of the campaign. We had a few new players, so I said, hey, we're not going to implement it straight away, but maybe in a couple sessions time, if you guys are happy to, we can try this 30-second timer in combat. Put on the 30-second timer, encourages people to remain engaged in combat. And after 4 sessions or so, I was DMing and I realised I don't need to implement this rule because all of the players are already really focused on what they're doing. They're already really, they're attentive when it's not their turn. When it gets to their turn, they're not taking a long time. I mean, the ones that generally take the longest are the spellcasters because they've got lots of things to look at. But everyone's already looking at their spells in between turns and doing a really good job. So that particular homebrew rule, I'm not worrying about using in this campaign. And this is what I mean, it really depends on the group that you're playing, but I suppose the important part is to make sure that you talk to your players as well about that.
Yeah, with any new rules and such.
Yeah.
So just for any experienced D&D players, they don't have this weird rule come out of nowhere, and you're just like, well, that's not how I play.
Technically, if you homebrew a rule like that and you just don't tell your players and throw it at them, they've got every right to be a bit upset and be like, hey, hang on, how come I'm under the pump on my turn?
Yeah.
Nowhere in the rule book does it say I've got a certain amount of time to make a decision. Why are you doing it? So you want to make sure that you ask your players about it and have them as part of the process to make sure that they think that it's a fair rule as well, because that's the other big thing with homebrew rules. You might think it's fair,
that someone else doesn't.
Bob, Joe, and Jim might think it's terrible. So you got to be careful with that sort of stuff. But I think it can really improve and personalise D&D in your particular campaign or your particular sessions to the group you're playing with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree 100%. Because, I feel like sometimes even if you bring up random rules halfway through the campaign, it's going to also look a bit railroady as well.
Yeah.
It's going to look like you're steering the campaign in a certain track. So... Yeah.
And big game mechanics as well, and especially if you are doing pre-written campaigns, you learn after doing it once. If I run this campaign again, I'm going to homebrew a few bits and pieces. It's not a spoiler as such, but one thing in particular, so I've run Tomb of Annihilation a couple times now actually. I've run Tomb of Annihilation, and that was the previous campaign I finished running, got through to the end, and rules as written, like the way that campaign book works, a really big aspect of that campaign is the travel. You guys are lost in a jungle, you're trying to work your way through, you get lost at different times, you find different things, uncover different things. Traveling is a really, really big aspect and part, like mechanic, of that campaign. However, one thing I would homebrew is the rules as written. The book itself says that at a normal speed, the party only moves 1 hex per day. So there's a big map that you get. The party have to uncover bits of the map as they go and explore, and the map is made up of lots of different hexes.
It's a massive map.
Massive map, big map. It was a hex crawl. It's known as a hex crawl.
Yeah.
And so basically, normal speed, you move 1 hex per day. If you move at fast speed, you can move at 2 hexes per day, but you get negatives to noticing things and stuff like that. Anyway, big mechanic on traveling. One thing I would homebrew if I was to run that campaign again, just based on my experiences, is I would say, right, the normal pace is 2 hexes per day, and the fast pace is 4 hexes per day.
Yeah.
So essentially doubling the speed at which people can move. And the main reason behind that is I noticed that there was so much of the jungle that the party didn't get to explore, partly because there was a time sort of like, an urgency to the campaign, and partly because I think after a while, of traveling at a slower pace and spending a long time in the jungle, correct me if I'm wrong, but the party probably got a little bit sick of travelling after a while at such a slow pace.
Especially when nothing was really happening. It just got a bit, okay, moved another hex. Okay, moved another hex. Like waiting for something to happen, and you kind of grew more expectations of what could happen in the jungle. Like, oh yeah, maybe we'll come across an alligator or a rhino or something,
A dinosaur.
We'll come across something that we've come across before.
Yeah.
It became a bit generic.
Yeah, and I think that, again, it comes down to the individual group as well, because that campaign in particular, you can play it as a meat grinder campaign. So it can be a very, very difficult, hardcore campaign based really around survivability. You've got to, hunt and scavenge for food and water. It's about surviving in the jungle, and that's like almost the main theme, is just surviving in the jungle. However, not everyone likes playing that sort of campaign.
No.
This doesn't mean like homebrewing the content to fit what your group wants to do, what you want to do as a DM, what your players enjoy doing. Homebrewing it to fit that is really important. Like I said, I think that, having experienced some of that sort of stuff before, I would definitely homebrew some of that sort of stuff in the future. Depending on, and if the group really wanted a really difficult, gritty campaign that, focuses really highly on survival, cool. I wouldn't have to homebrew it, and I can just run it exactly as the book says.
Yeah. I feel like a gritty survival campaign would be hard, but it'll be also fun.
I would honestly enjoy running that. I know you've done it now.
Yeah, but I won't do it again. I'm traumatized.
Even with different groups, down the track, I would love running that campaign again, rules as written, and having it. Like I played it a little bit easier because there was a few new players, and it is a very if you play it rules as written, very, very difficult campaign. So I put the training wheels on a little bit and made a little bit. I didn't some players died still. I didn't play, put the kid gloves on, but I definitely homebrewed it in the sense to make it a little bit more fluent for you guys.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be really fun to run it rules as written at some point and make it this really tough, gritty campaign.
I don't know if, maybe I can notice that now that you did homebrew a little bit to make it a bit more, like you said, a little bit easier.
It was more to make it a little bit more enjoyable.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to make it easy. Like I said, we killed a couple of players.
True.
It was more trying to make sure that it was enjoyable and it wasn't getting stale.
It was just kind of like, when you said that it flowed a bit more and, to ease up on the survival because we had the new players. I don't know if it was just because my character was quite OP at the time or... Oh, I forgot I've lost it. I don't know, if my character was just OP...
You weren't finding it that difficult?
No. Because at the start of Tomb of Annihilation, isn't there like a little passage about ripping up character sheets?
Yeah.
I remember you saying at the start, and I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be hard." And then we finished it, and I was like, "I don't know if it's because of the homebrew or because my character was OP."
Oh, your character was certainly very strong. Like I said,
Yeah.
2 people's characters died.
True.
Like, to me, I've played in campaigns where no characters died. To me, that's pretty significant. And that was me taking it a little bit easier on you guys. So you can imagine if 2 people died and that was me taking it a little bit easier on you guys, if you had have actually played it rules as written without my homebrew in it, it would have been even more difficult. But like I said, it depends on... I could tell that, especially the newer players, not everyone enjoys rolling to check for food and water every day. Not everyone enjoys that. So it's homebrewing to suit the particular situation, group, style of play that you're trying to reach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I feel like I could talk about homebrew
I think we covered
forever.
the necessities of homebrew.
But yeah, homebrew is I think something that's really essential to D&D. It's something that you can use as a player. Players can try and introduce their own homebrew stuff as well, as long as the DM approves it.
Yep.
The DM can introduce their own homebrew stuff as well, again, as long as you run it by your players. In campaigns, you're introducing homebrew all the time. If you're running a pre-written campaign, you probably don't even realise that you're introducing homebrew stuff into it.
True.
Even with like the way you rule different rules or abilities and stuff, that's all really a certain type of homebrew, and it's really important. But I think that it's awesome in the fact that it personalises the way we play the game.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You can't do that with video games. When you pop into a video game, you can't be like, I really like this mechanic, I'm going to change it.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just rewrite the code. I mean, maybe some people can rewrite the code, but...
But I think that...
Yeah, pretty much covers most of it.
Yeah, now I think it's time for your favourite part of
For my joke.
the episode.
If I'm being entirely honest, this isn't my best one.
Okay.
It's good. I like it, but it's not my best one.
That's
I
okay.
feel like you don't say the answer, but I feel like you'll be able to get the answer pretty quick.
Oh, but I feel like
Simple.
I get so accomplished. It's like a competition.
It's simple, but it's great.
All right, go.
What is a rogue's favourite type of metal?
I don't know.
You don't know. A rogue's favourite type of metal is steel.
Oh, yeah.
I thought you would get that one.
I was just like waiting for it, I thought I would.
Well, there you go. It's better than I thought it was, that one.
That was good. Alrighty, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're on every Thursday at 8 p.m. And we're Married with Dragons.
Yeah, feel free to come along next time, talk about all things D&D. We try to keep it for, understandable for new players as well as relevant to the bit more experienced DMs and players as well.
And we do read your messages in the chat. Sorry
yes.
if we don't get to them, but we do. We go on a bit of a tangent sometimes.
Thank you to everyone for engaging, though. It makes it a lot of fun having some people, get into it with us.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll see you next week.
Fantastic, guys. Thanks. See you next time.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Hey, legend. Thanks for watching the show. If you want to make sure that you're up to date with all of the Game on Oz content here on YouTube, make sure you click the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.